All right, welcome everybody. Thank you for attending today's second webinar to our Power Webinar series focused on enterprise asset management. My name is Rick Seisel. I'll be acting as moderator for today's presentation on how to construct an asset management plan. We are going to go ahead and get started in just a second, but before we do that, I did want to take a moment to reintroduce today's presenter, Jim Hammond. Last week, Jim kicked off our EAM Power Webinar series talking about how legislation has historically impacted infrastructure asset managers, as well as how more recent legislation such as MAP 21 and the FAST Act will affect organizations moving forward. Today, he'll be discussing the benefits of implementing an effective asset management plan and, additionally, how you can collect the data needed to build your plan out. Just one quick note before we get started here, the microphones have been muted, so if any of you do have any questions at any time during the presentation, you are encouraged to use the WebEx chat tool. All of you should see the chat icon located in the top right corner of your screen, and this will act as an instant messaging tool. So please feel free to use the WebEx chat tool to enter any questions during the presentation, and just be sure to address them to host. I'll be happy to field the questions and relay them to Jim at the conclusion of our presentation for a brief Q&A session. All right, Jim, looks like we can see your screen just fine, and you can send this away whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks Rick, and welcome everybody. I'll go ahead and jump right in and get started. Just a quick review of the agenda for today. I'm going to quickly go over what we discussed last week and just how it sets the framework for this week's discussion. Talk about considerations for creating the asset management plan. That includes coordination, investigation, and development of it. And then from this, the beginning steps of establishing 1.0 of your plan. And I say that because no doubt your plan will evolve over time. And then on to aligning the organization. That is to ensure frequent, consistent, two-way communication and establishing a solid platform. And finally, defining the plan. Document it, reinforce it, review it, and let it evolve as your business goes. And then some time for question and answers at the end. Okay, so last week we talked about how does legislation impact in our daily lives, and we went into some of the details of MAP 21 and the FAST Act and how today states and MPO organizations are significantly impacted by this legislation, and it's just a matter of time before those agencies in turn mandate similar data from cities and county organizations. A lot of this is true because the cities and counties themselves manage a portion of the national highway system. And since the states fund a significant portion of the city and county roadway network, the states have that leverage ultimately to mandate that same information that is required of them by the federal government, that cities and counties in turn feed to the states. So we talked about one of the main principles in the new legislation being the mandate of adopting a risk and performance-based asset management plan. And the goals include providing better transparency and accountability, at the same time establishing more effective and timely application of federal resources. And as a component of the new requirements, the relationship between performance and funding can actually materialize in the form of financial penalties where adherence is not met. Okay? And then, we talked about this being a timely undertaking. While daunting at first, the blow can be softened by starting where your strengths are and where you're already well positioned in this process, and then building from there. This is a cyclical process, and you'll improve upon and learn from it as you iterate through all the different steps. Okay, so why do all of this, right? Other than because it's mandated by federal law and odds are soon to be imposed by your individual state. Well, some good reasons for the considerations include lessening your assets and your organizational risk profile. Last week we talked about the 5 T's, and to summarize those real quick here, the identification, the analysis, evaluation, treating, and transfer of risk. Okay, a good plan involves all staff, open lines of communication with recursive review of best practice, and the goal continually realizing efficiencies in resource, capital, and operation investment. And if an asset is well maintained, it's safer, right? Safer for the public, safer for your employees, and in turn less stressful and easier to manage. There's also other regulatory mandates, aside from the federal acts that are involved here, that asset managers must comply with. So formalizing and adopting and adamantly adhering to a new asset management plan ensures that those other reporting and permitting and accounting and financial requirements aren't missed or otherwise fall through the cracks. Constant, consistent, and open communication channels, as well as comprehensive and effective training, those things inherently tend towards employee satisfaction. And if you practice what you preach, so too will your employees. Through better forecasting and planning, the lessening of risk profiles, accurate asset situational awareness, apply best practices that the organization has developed through these processes, organizations are then going to save money. And these practices provide confidence that future budget projections are accurate. And last on my list, for good reasons but not least, for the sake of being good stewards of our environment and our own personal well-being and happiness, it just makes sense to put in the effort to ensure that all of our infrastructure assets are most effectively maintained. Okay, so now that we understand some considerations and justifications, how do we go about it? Where do we start? Well, we can start with preparing, our goals and objectives and establishing the plan. And I also want to note, too, that all this information that I'm presenting today is a mixture of different principles, whether it's coming from AASHTO or the FHWA or those asset management principles and methodologies such as ISO 55000 and PAS 55. This is all information that's readily available up, and there's no secret to the recipe here. So anybody can go out and do some investigation online and be able to come up with the same concepts and principles here. But in doing all this, defining organizational goals and objectives, right? This is a critical step, and they are the litmus test for which an organization is judged. So measurable metrics are defined around these goals, and it's critical that time is spent by leadership defining and well articulating what those goals are. And in doing so, get multiple levels of feedback throughout the organization and question all assumptions. Think in the abstract to facilitate the realization of best practice. Right? So what are you doing today that does not fall in line with the new goals and objectives, and how do you modify those? And then what are those crazy ideas that were previously dismissed that now it's time to revisit and circle back to that might fall in line with the new goals? Okay, and review, analyze, adapt, and repeat these methods because no doubt. As your future needs change, so too will these goals and objectives. All right? And then what's the context for setting these goals and objectives? Is it simply to meet the defined levels of service with available funds? Are there additional mandates, i.e. the risk component we're talking about, or resource utilization, perhaps a need to get asset longevity or better asset longevity targets, raise customer satisfaction survey results? Those things are going to be unique for each organization, so understanding that context is important. And then what is the framework in which the goals and objectives will be realized, right? We've talked about some asset management methodologies, again, with the PAS 55 and ISO 55000, but other asset management principles, may be used as well. And what does your organization possess today that could be leveraged? Is there a well-established ERP or enterprise resource planning tool in place? Or perhaps through going through this exercise, you realize the need for an acquisition of a new, more modern enterprise asset management solution. And then get everybody to drink the proverbial Kool-Aid. Organizational buy-in is key to this success. Raising awareness, involving all the right people, regularly soliciting feedback, and keeping those open lines of communication. All right, so these are all important parts of preparing your goals and objectives. And then establishing the scope. So which assets are you responsible for managing or are going to be first impacted by this? And understanding that each different asset has their own unique life cycles and risk profiles and what have you. So those things will need to be independently taken into consideration. And which actions are first being addressed? Is this, initially going to be simply an asset inventory of all your bridges? Or an organizational top-down risk assessment exercise, repair versus replace analysis, So to be sure whatever those actions that are going to be decided upon fall in line with the newly defined goals and objectives. And which business processes are going to be impacted by these changes. So what additional training and resources are going to be required? And is there any impact to your level of service as a result of adopting these new practices, and what mitigations can you put in place? And what data? What data do we need to collect to effectively measure newly defined performance targets, to make the most and best informed decisions, and to verify the actions that we've taken are along the lines with reaching our defined goals and objectives? Okay. In terms of scope creep, don't let your defined goals and objectives be so broad that they track you into doing too much and not clearly understanding if what you're doing is really following in line with those goals and objectives. So be specific and understanding it's okay to crawl, walk, and then run as you implement these processes, and they can grow over time. As far as self-assessment and gap analysis, ASHTO offers some free self-assessment tests that ask questions to help identify your existing strengths, discover where you're at today in regards to an established risk and performance-based asset management plan, and determine where you want to be from that point, right? And from the tests, you can determine where your organization falls in line with the maturity level. That is, where is your organization today in terms of progressing towards the risk and performance-based management methodologies, and how big is the gap from where you want to be? And knowing this sets the stage for what's ahead and the next steps, okay? And while self-assessment is a valuable exercise and helps to identify, useful processes and approaches, it doesn't provide that detailed method for moving from this generalized plan to the hands-on implementation. And the next step is addressed by that gap analysis. So the gap analysis facilitates the identification of the key discrepancies between the current and desired states, and it helps establish exactly what those next steps are going to be and aids in prioritizing them. So knowing these things and taking into consideration your newly defined objectives, your organizational's unique regulatory requirements, right, and what those defined level of service expectations are, and what your affected assets are going to be in adopting this plan and their risk profile, all of your available resources. Knowing those things, then organizations can begin to define those best practices and methodologies to act upon and shrink that gap. Okay, so as a part of this is, developing your change strategy, right? And some of the activities involved in creating that change culture is convincing the people of the benefits, and removing crisis is the only justification for change. Leadership needs to instill the concept of question everything with the goal of identifying efficiencies and savings, and developing a vision of constant improvement, constantly welcoming change, and strategy improvements that engage all of the staff. Make actions consistent with change strategy. So everything is on the table as it pertains to organizational change, so long as it is in compliance or in parallel to the goals and objectives and demonstrates those efficiencies and savings. But once those are identified, make sure that you follow through with implementing those good ideas that are shared. Okay? And reinforce the change with short-term successes. Initially set reasonable and achievable goals, and communicating those successes strengthen organizational buy-in. Okay? Keep focus on change efforts. This circles back to communication, but ensuring that leadership continues efforts embracing beneficial change is an important aspect to the new culture. Okay, so change is a part of the new culture, and communicating change is a part of that, part of the new norm. Convey not to be afraid of change, and that the sky is not falling, right? And with that, there needs to be a defined vision, a vision with integrity, that is succinct, but still provides sufficient detail so it's understand exactly what is expected and how those changes are going to impact employees. And also instill a sense of collaboration, or a sense, hey, we're all in this together. So, while highlighting the benefits individuals will see from adopting change, an important caveat is it's up to those individuals to communicate where best practices and efficiencies may be hiding. So put ownership onto every individual in the organization. And there must be an accessible two-way communication channel. So it may be an internet site, regular conference calls, bulletin boards, or some method of submitting new ideas, but that must be in place as well. And finally here, if the message itself is not clear or not motivating, or staff don't care, your odds of institutional buy-in are going to significantly diminish. So the message must be clear, relevant, and in line with staff beliefs. Okay? So incorporating these business processes into your existing business processes. You know, not all of your processes will change, or some only might be slightly altered when implementing the risk and performance-based plan. So find the right place to incorporate those changes into your existing practices that make sense for your organization. And these additional practices, you know, they'll need to provide the data for tracking performance. So take the time to carefully define what those data points that are needed, you know, how they're going to be recorded, and how they will be disseminated and shared, whether internally or externally. Establishing the roles. At first, perhaps a small leadership group may be spearheading the adoption of a new risk-based, performance-based asset management plan. But it's also that leadership's role, it's also critical in developing the ongoing champion as the plan matures and solidifies into these structured practices. So those individuals that are tasked with the long-term efforts, you know, must also maintain the skill sets that foster the success. So think in the applicable backgrounds, right? Where, you know, engineering, the economics, the project management experience, and making sure there's a right fit there. And then also the intangibles of, you know, team building experience, organizational and communication skills, and good old-fashioned grit and perseverance can't be overlooked as well. Okay, so best practices when preparing your asset management plan. You know, a reevaluation of the defined levels of service for each asset class. You know, that is, what is the customer's communicated value of service, and then what is the actual utilization based on objective collected data. And so have those been, you know, well-reasoned and debated in public forum and vetted, and you know, to go through those processes iteratively as well. Demonstrate knowledge of growth and demand, right? Make it routine process to identify future demands and critically analyze those assumptions. So if there's an expectation for growth, urban growth boundary to be expanded, you know, to be able to analyze that and find out what the dimensions are of that and how that will impact your organization and be prepared to act upon those right away. Coordination of projects with overlapping agencies. You know, for example, if you're replacing water mains on a given roadway and other underground utilities may have scheduled work along the same segment of road, communicating your efforts far enough in advance and even having something like an enterprise asset management solution in place that can automatically identify these overlaps, right? And that could allow for seamless coordination of efforts, saving not only time and money, but improving your level of service and your customer satisfaction. The above examples go hand in hand with resource allocation. So wherever possible you want to identify your efficiencies, you know, whether it's through an equipment reservation system, you know, for upcoming projects to make sure that you have the resources you need so there's no delays, or the availability of being able to easily identify underutilized assets through a program like this, and then right-sizing your fleet and equipment inventories. Using a solution that ensures all the resources too, your assets, your humans, your financial resources, so all of your scheduling of your individuals and scheduling and assignments of upcoming projects and what have you, to have that full visibility into those. That's paramount in this process. Some other best practices. You know, we talk about buy-in, but full support and commitment includes all levels of decision-making in the organization, not just within the asset management department. So, for example, your human resources department needs to ensure the retention and hiring of the best people, right? And IT must be involved, not just the deployment of whatever some selected system is, but their engagement to make sure that the systems mirror internal expertise, right? You don't buy an Oracle system when you're a Microsoft shop, or make sure that selected systems are future-proof for a business vision and a technical platform. So, because in the end, right, if the system looked great in the demo, but it's not scalable or flexible to meet future needs, and it's difficult to support, you're not going to be successful in implementing this new type of asset management plan. So, and is there accurate asset awareness? Do you know where everything is? Where they physically are, or what you manage, where they physically are, where those assets are within their life cycle, and what's their monetary value? Are they depreciating, appreciating, and where within that process? And have all options in developing preservation programs been considered, right? So can savings and efficiencies be gained by finding ways to better maintain assets versus replacing them every 10 years just because that's what you've always done, right? And then is there evidence to support defined goals and objectives are being met with the maximum efficiencies? So what are those metrics that you've defined and are measuring that definitively support progress towards achieving the newly defined goals and objectives and targets, what have you? Okay. So regardless of whatever your methodologies are, if you're going to, use practices revolving around FHWA or even American Society for Testing Materials, PAC 55, ISO 50000, all those principles, you're going to need tools to support your processes. And these tools may vary from, the free spreadsheet-based assessment and gap analysis tools provided by ASHTO, all the way up to the other end of the spectrum, a full enterprise resource planning package that's already in place within your organization. But regardless of whichever is used, there are significant considerations to be made. An organization may want to use the ERP because it's the single system that manages everything from planning and purchasing and inventory and construction projects, scheduling, human resources, what have you, and for all aspects of the organization. But a system-wide solution often lacks the details required for the world of infrastructure asset management. So then if it's decided an enterprise asset management solution more gears to that is to be needed, there's also some specific considerations for the EAM system itself, right? A well-positioned solution should include, total asset lifecycle management of any customer-defined asset type or category, whether it's roads, bridges, buildings, parks, water, sewer, storm, and all the sub-assets, so there's room for growth and expansion within the system. And capital planning and capital projects and all of your CIP capabilities within that. So, including budgetaries and phases and risk considerations and funding sources and, defined allocations and approvals and stakeholder details. So very robust capital planning tools. And then equipment planning and procurement, right? Procurement and disposal, along with replacement analysis at the individual asset level, even at the class or larger levels, and deterioration curves, again, at the multiple levels, and projected condition assessments. So very robust equipment planning tools. Integration with GIS platforms such as Esri, Google, or Bing are also components to all of this. And you need to make sure that the system has the ability to handle all the unique considerations for the different GIS asset types, whether they're point, linear, polygonal, or rolling stock type assets. For example, does the system incorporate a linear reference system to be able to handle work along segments of pipeline assets and the historical tracking of all that work over time and visualization of that? All operation activities, in terms of work management, scheduling, projects, inspections, warranties, accidents, and getting down very granular into tracking all your costs. All that needs to be fully considered in a system. And your enterprise level inventory and part materials capabilities and having robust systems there, and have all those systems integrate so they talk to each other in real time. So as you issue parts to a project, it's automatically decremented from inventory and replenishment processes take place, okay? And reservation and allocation and assignment capabilities. So the ability to reserve your equipment for your projects and to know that you're going to have those available so there's no delays incurred. And then from all that data that's accrued through those operational aspects, again, knowing how to write your inventories where underutilized assets can be removed, or if a signed piece of equipment's come up missing, you immediately know who to go ask these questions. Okay? But ultimately, the tools leveraged, they're going to vary and will depend on your organization's unique needs. So when defining those requirements, take into consideration, not just these practices, but what you expect your needs are going to be in the future for other potentially departments. And is the system scalable for those other departments to potentially come on board? And what other offerings does the vendor provide that could be of value to your organization in the future? Maybe not today as you're rolling out these practices, but nonetheless could be in the future. Okay, and then with that, some things to consider as we wrap up here. You know, keep that message of this change in implementing the new asset management plan honest, succinct, and impactful, and regularly convey it across multiple media with open two-way channels of communication, right? And you may already have a condition-based or some other asset management methodology in place, so your practices are still key components within this. So start where your strengths are and build from there. And leverage your contacts within state organizations, as you know, they are actively involved in these processes today. And it's only, you know, as a matter of time before the county and city levels may have to incorporate these. So, and then, you know, MAP 21 was signed into law 4 years ago, and some states are just coming up to speed. So know that this is a journey. It takes time, and define and celebrate those small successes along the way to reinforce that transformation, right? And finally, next week we're going to talk about how AssetWorks can help with all of these processes. Okay? So with that, if there are any questions.
Okay, everyone, we are going to open up the floor for some of your questions at this time. And just as a quick reminder, if any of you do have any questions, you can IM them to, excuse me, to host using the WebEx chat tool on your screen. And provided that we do have enough time, I'll pass the question to Jim, and I'll be happy to get back to you with an answer. So just going to go through some of the questions that came in at the beginning of the presentation here, Jim. One of our attendees had asked, what are the timelines for having to implement a risk-based plan?
Yeah, that's really going to vary. I mean, for states and the MPOs, it's today, right? MAP 21 has been in place for 4 years, and states have had 4 years to get ready for it. And it also varies from agency to agency. Transits have different timelines impacted versus the infrastructure and the road and bridges asset managers and things like that. For the cities and counties, you know, there is no defined timeline and requirement at this point in time, but the expectation is there that states will impose that on cities and counties, and those timelines are going to be defined uniquely by each state, so it will vary from place to place. But that said, if this is something that you know, a county or city wants to implement today, you know, because there are provisions to be able to start small and grow and then go big, you know, in time as you become more experienced with these processes, you know, you could realize some of these advances and advantages, you know, within six months. You could be seeing some of these advantages.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Towards the beginning of your presentation, you talked a little bit about establishing the plan, and one of the slides you brought up had mentioned taking stake in your current maturity model. What are some key indicators of a healthy maturity model?
Some key indicators of a healthy model, or where are you in line with you know, the definitions of a risk-based and performance-based asset management plan? So if you are already taking those things into consideration, do you have established risk profiles for asset classes, right? So if you're doing that kind of thing, you're already well along. But if you're working, you know, in a worst first philosophy, you're on paper and pencil, you know, those are some kind of the red flags that you might be a little bit less mature in establishing the model. You know, if you're somebody, on the other hand, too, that you maybe not doing risk-based profiles analysis, but you have a very well-established condition-based plan, right? You may be well along those lines. So it wouldn't take a giant leap or, you know, jumping over that gap to then implement these risk management considerations.
Okay. And towards the end, you mentioned some of the available tools and solutions that are out there today. And one of the slides had mentioned a GIS query tool. And one of our attendees was asking, how does that typically work?
That can be anything. You know, there are a lot of Esri, for example. They are an independent GIS platform, and they are the 10,000-pound gorilla in the geospatial world. And as coming across, most organizations are using Esri to some component. And those are the asset inventories that are defining what they have, where are they, and all the attribution of those assets. Now, as that then is incorporated into actually going through the operational asset management, and risk profiles of those properties, that's where a solution like an enterprise asset management solution would come into play. Sometimes those systems sit on top of an Azure world, sometimes they're independent too, and they have two-way real-time communications. But it's those systems, the EAM systems, that are then used to actually do the boots on the ground maintenance and asset assessment and condition assessment of those assets.
Okay, well, excellent job once again, Jim. Looks like that is all the time we have for today. And at this time, I would like to just thank all of you again for taking the time to attend today's presentation. And hopefully, once again, you secured some valuable takeaways to keep in mind moving forward. And we do hope to have you with us next week for our final webinar in our Asset Management to the Rescue PAL webinar series. Jim, once again, I'd like to thank you on behalf of AssetWorks. And as you can see right here, Jim's contact information is available. So if any of you have any follow-up questions or concerns. Also, as we did earlier this week, we'll be sending out an email with the webinar recording for today's presentation in the next few days. And all of you will receive a reminder for next Wednesday's grand finale webinar, which will focus on how to make complex asset management easier with EAM. Once again, we hope you'll join us. We want to thank you all for attending today. Jim and I will be sticking around for another few minutes in case any of you still do have questions. Otherwise, have a great day. We look forward to having you with us next time.